Hello, my name is Michael Spaeth, and I am the current planning principal planner for the town of Morro Valley and host of tonight's neighborhood meeting. Thank you for tuning into the first step in this public outreach process. This process has been kicked off in response to a proposed subdivision on a site near you, a property located south of Naranja Drive, approximately 1/4 mile west of North First Avenue. Clearly, the mechanics of tonight's meeting are going to be a bit different than our regular in-person meetings. Our number one goal tonight is to have a fair, efficient, and productive meeting. Everyone's microphone, other than myself, will be muted throughout the meeting unless it is your turn to speak to ensure as smooth and efficient meeting as possible. Only I can turn on your microphone at the appropriate time if you'd like to ask a question or provide comments. At that time, I can also turn on your video if you'd like. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Zoom, I will provide a quick how-to later in my presentation. Please hold your questions until we are done with the presentations. Tonight's meeting is scheduled to go until 7:30 p.m. We may go longer with the group's permission if necessary. We will try and get through as many questions as possible. Finally, I'd like to note that additional information has been posted on ovprojects.com and will continue to be updated as the town receives the anticipated formal applications from the applicant. The video of this meeting and the PowerPoint will similarly be posted there tomorrow. If anyone is having trouble using Zoom during the meeting, please contact Jessica Hind, our Constituent Services Coordinator, at 229-4711. Here is our agenda for tonight's meeting. Excuse me. First, I will briefly go through the anticipated public participation process. Secondly, I will provide key background information about the property, including the existing zoning rights, discuss some concerns the town is aware of, and touch on the review and process and evaluation criteria. Third, I will introduce Mr. Paul Olin, who is representing the property owner. He will expand on the site's history, existing zoning, and the property owner's development proposal. Fourth, I'm going to open it up for your questions and comments. And then lastly, I will provide information on next steps moving forward and provide information on how to stay informed and make your voice heard. So let's get started. First, I'd like to take a moment to orient everyone with respect to the subject property. The property is approximately 58 acres in size, located south of Naranja Drive, approximately 1/4 mile west of North First Avenue, as shown on the image on the screen and outlined in blue. The property is bounded on the east by the Push Ridge Vistas subdivisions, shown in white, on the south by Highlands Mobile Home Park, shown in purple, and on the west by Custom Homes. Highlands Wash is shown in blue, north of the site across Naranja Drive for additional context. Now that we're familiar with the property's location, to start, I'd like to quickly touch on several key takeaways we want everyone to leave this meeting with. I will go into more detail during my presentation, but want to make sure everyone understands these key items. First, homes are already allowed on the subject property. Second, the approval for homes on this property was done by Pima County prior to annexation of the property into Morro Valley. Third, we are well aware of the ongoing drainage issues in the area, and we will be working with the applicant to ensure this project is a positive development for the area. Fourth, if the plan meets code requirements, the town must meet its legal obligations to approve. If this was a new rezoning request, the town would not support a subdivision in this location. But because it was previously approved by Pima County, if it meets town requirements, the town is legally required to approve the subdivision plan. Again, I'll go through each of these in more detail during my presentation. The town requires applicants to engage in community outreach at the front end of the process before formal applications are submitted, as it is important to hear your comments and questions early and often. Does your participation matter? Absolutely. However, because we involve neighbors early in the process, we may not have answers to a lot of the questions you may have tonight. Once we receive a formal submittal, we will have more information and can answer those questions during the second neighborhood meeting. Typically, an in-person neighborhood meeting is held prior to the formal submittal of a subdivision plat application. However, the zoning code enables the planning and zoning administrator to approve alternative methods of public outreach when warranted. With the ongoing COVID-19 social distancing requirements, alternative methods are necessary and are the best solution under the existing circumstances. So where are we in the process? An informational video was uploaded several weeks ago to ovprojects.com regarding the applicant's proposal. Hopefully you all have had a chance to view that. If you haven't, we strongly encourage you to do so. For those of you who have, thank you for taking the time and forwarding questions prior to tonight's meeting. Tonight we are holding the first neighborhood meeting. Property owners near the site have been directly notified by mail, and the site has been posted with yellow signs in multiple locations. If you weren't notified and wish to be in the future, please send us a request with your name and address to ask@orovalleyaz.gov to be added to the list. As I stated previously, we do not have a formal submittal from the property owner, but we do anticipate one sometime next month. A pre-application concept for the site has been provided, and you will hear more about that directly from Mr. Olin. Following a couple rounds of review for code conformance, a second neighborhood meeting will be held. The date and time of that meeting has not been determined at this time, but notices will be sent out in advance once a date is selected. Following neighborhood meetings, there are additional opportunities for public input as well. The application requires consideration by the Planning and Zoning Commission at a public meeting. After receiving public comment, they may vote to provide a formal recommendation to Town Council. The project will then be considered by Town Council. Notices will be sent out in advance of both meetings. Before we get into the detail about the applicant's proposal, I'd like to establish that this is a request to develop private property. All property owners have the right to request review of their development proposal, and the town must process all applications. It is their charge to create, justify, and seek Town Council approval of subdivision plat applications. Before I provide some background on the property zoning entitlements, I'd like to explain exactly what we mean by zoning. The zoning of the property is what actually gives the property owner the legal right to use their land. It establishes which uses are permitted, for example, homes, and which development standards are applicable. Things like number of lots or density, building height, and setbacks. The town has 18 zoning districts that range from large lot residential to commercial and open space. Moreover, the town also has 18 planned area developments, or PADs as they're known, which are zoning requirements that are specific to that property. A PAD allows a mix of uses, is customizable, and can be tailored to be site specific. The zoning for the site is River's Edge PAD, which is outlined in black on the image on the screen. Within the PAD, the property has underlying zoning designations of open space, shown in green, and Pima County CR2, shown in yellow. This designation allows detached single-family homes, just as it does in the Push Ridge Vista developments east of the site. The PAD was approved using the existing Pima County zoning designations at the time. Now that I've detailed what is meant by zoning, I'm going to quickly touch on the existing development rights for the property. We know the first question many of you will have is, how can you build in a wash area with steep hillsides? Again, this is an unusual situation. The approved rezoning plan for the entire River's Edge PAD, including this property, was approved by the Pima County Board of Supervisors in the mid-1980s. That approval, well before annexation into the town, established the entitlement, or right, to develop the property as shown in the approved rezoning plan shown on the image on the left. Keep in mind, Pima County approved the plan for the entire PAD area, which includes this property shown in blue on the right-hand image. Once a legal right to develop is granted, it cannot simply be removed by the town. As opposed to a rezoning where an applicant is asking for new development rights, the right to build homes on the property has already been approved. During the neighborhood meeting process, we will be focused on site design and code conformance. The town may, and does, requires compliance with current drainage, street, sewer, and other town standards, but we cannot deny the application if and when it is deemed code compliant. Put more simply, if the property owner demonstrates that the proposal meets all town requirements, it must be approved. Although developing in such a wash area with steep hillsides may not make sense to many, the property owner has the legal right to develop their property as represented on the approved rezoning plan approved by Pima County. The applicant has proposed a site plan with 46 detached single-family lots with access from both Naranja Drive on the north and Shorecliff Drive on the south. Mr. Olin will again provide more detail regarding the concept during his presentation. Now that I've provided an overview of the applicant's site plan at broad strokes, I'd like to quickly touch on a couple of known issues affecting the site that we heard during the earlier neighborhood meetings and through ongoing public works efforts in the area. The town is well aware of the existing drainage concerns in the area, specifically those affecting the Highlands Mobile Home Park south of the site. Because of that, we required the applicant to provide a much more detailed drainage proposal prior to scheduling this meeting. This is something not usually required at this point, but considering the existing drainage issues, we required additional evaluation before meeting with neighbors. Though we did require more detail at this point, as I stated earlier, we don't have all the information we will need, which will be provided with the formal submittal. Again, we want to involve neighbors early in the process. Ultimately, the applicant is going to have to design a drainage concept that does not adversely impact water coming onto the property or leaving the property. They need to design a system that handles internally any increases in runoff caused by their development. Again, we will be working with the applicant to ensure this project is a positive for the area. Another issue is impacts to hillsides. Obviously, this site sits below the ridge where the Push Ridge Vistas subdivisions are located. The applicant will be required to design the site with little to no impacts to slopes greater than 25% or those shown in red on the right-hand image to ensure the integrity of the hillside. Detailed construction plans will be required in the future, demonstrating conformance with this requirement. Now, before I turn it over to the applicant for his presentation, I'd like to invite the town engineer, Mr. Paul Kiesler, to add some additional comments regarding drainage. Mr. Kiesler, you should be unmuted and your video is on.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Spade. So, Mr. Spade did touch on this, on the subject. So, with regards to drainage and the wash, the town and the county have been studying this wash for quite some time now. We know that there are existing issues down in the Highlands Mobile Home Park, and we've been working to get grants and funding from FEMA, actually, to help create a mitigation plan that would take care of any future potential flooding issues. Now, with that said, as Mr. Spade said, the development that's upstream, the development that we're here for tonight, being an entitled project, they need to manage what's called the difference between the pre-development and the post-development flows. This is a code requirement. And they've already submitted an initial drainage report in which they show that they are they're out of the floodplain, and they have done adequate mitigation measures so that when they build their subdivision, the flows leaving and actually heading south towards the mobile home park are in the same condition as they are today without the development. So we're working with the applicant, and even though the applicant's not required to by code, we are requesting from them additional detention measures to help, again, lessen the flow going south towards the mobile home park. Now, the grant that we were following and we were trying to get a hold of, we were not successful in securing that grant from FEMA. So what that means is that that infrastructure that we had planned to put in is not going to go in. However, we're looking for a positive outcome if possible, and this would be completely upon the goodwill of this current developer, the application that you see, as it's not required by code. Again, with their entitlements already set, they don't have to go up over and above, but we are requesting this. And I believe the applicant may address this later on this evening. The other issue that the town engineer is very aware of is, of course, traffic. And we do not have a traffic analysis yet. And I know the applicant's working on one, and one will be required as part of this. And what we'll be looking at is the requirements of whether a right turn lane and most likely a left turn lane will be required. So that's forthcoming. We don't have an answer for you this evening, but we'll be able to share that answer once that analysis is complete. So with that, Mr. Spaeth, I'd like to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kiesler. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Olin, representing the property owner, to discuss the what and why of their proposal. Mr. Olin, you should be unmuted and video ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Spaeth. Would you be able to put the slides up? Perfect, thank you. Good evening, my name is Paul Oland. As Mr. Spaeth mentioned, I'm representing the property owners and Meritage Homes. On the call also is Dennis Roberts with Atwell Engineering, who performed his group performed the initial drainage analysis that Mr. Kiesler referenced, and his group will be handling all the civil engineering on site in terms of grading and all the other designs. So he is on the phone as well to answer any technical questions of that nature. So Mr. Spaeth, of course, did a great job of explaining the existing entitlement, the existing zoning, and the history there. So I won't repeat that. I wanted to hit some highlights of the plan that we're proposing, and then I'm sure there will be a number of questions. So just to make a very quick comparison here, you can see on the screen, the image on the left is the 61 homes that are approved under the existing zoning that Mr. Spaeth mentioned from the 80s there. That is what the entitlement currently allows. What we're proposing is the site plan on the right. So what that involves are several design considerations, one of which has to do with the wash and the drainage, as Mr. Kiesler indicated. What we have tried to do, and I think very successfully done, is taking a look not only at the existing open space line, which you can see sort of runs diagonally through the site. It follows the western boundary of the existing lots on the one on the left. The existing lots. Yep, exactly. And so that line there, what we have done, because that line doesn't really line up very well with the denser vegetation within the wash or with the town's mapped critical resource area, basically the core of the wash there. So what we have done is rather than just proposing lots out to that open space line as shown on the left, we've pulled back our proposed development to align more with what the wash actually looks like, align with the area that the town's environmentally sensitive lands ordinance has identified as being the most sensitive areas, and that has resulted also in a reduction in the number of lots. So we are proposing, as Mr. Spaeth mentioned, 46 instead of the 61 that are allowed. Homes will range in size from a little over 2,300 square feet to almost 3,500 square feet. It will be a mix of 1- and 2-story homes as allowed by existing zoning. The roadways that we're proposing, you can see they follow the planned road alignment pretty well. And that planned road alignment in the intervening years from the mid-'80s when that left-hand plan was approved, and today the sewer line was installed along that alignment, and it serves some homes actually on the north side of Naranja Drive. So with that existing sewer alignment and existing sewer easement, maintenance easement that Pima County uses, we are following that easement with the road. So basically there's a existing scar out there that we're following with the road. Big difference though is that rather than having a continuous road as shown on the plan on the left there between Lambert and Naranja, we are breaking it in the middle so that the lower portion will feature larger lots, and then only the northern portion will feature the smaller lots that line up with the existing plan. There's no impact on anybody's views here. All of these lots, both the north side and the south side, are significantly lower than homes on either side of the low-lying area in there. So push ridge views will be completely unimpacted. And the drainage benefits, obviously, we by code have to maintain, not make the drainage flows, the 100-year storm flows coming off the property or coming onto the property any different than they are today. We're not allowed to modify those. However, what we will be doing is working with the town to adjust our drainage design to provide a drainage benefit to the downstream properties. The mobile home park there currently experiences some pretty significant flooding during major storm events. And so, as I mentioned, we'll be working with the town to adjust our drainage design to find ways where it can be mutually beneficial and not just meet code at the very basic level. Now, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a cross section of the property, which was actually included in our informational video that we filmed a few weeks ago. And what you can see here are the homes on the west side, up on the hill, and then the Push Ridge Vista homes on the east side are represented on the right side of this graphic. And so, of course, the hillsides on both sides will be preserved. The main wash channel does meander over the years as major flood events come through, but the area between hillsides is more than what the floodplain needs in order to convey the flow successfully and safely from north to south through the subdivision. So the channel right now is pushed up for the most part against the west side of the low-lying areas. As it approaches the center of the wash of the land, the wash area broadens out a little bit, becomes very shallow, and then as it approaches the mobile home park, it continues in that same manner. So what we'll be proposing are what's shown here sort of on the right-hand side of the graphic with the street. There you go. And then homes on either side of the street. And then just to the left of that home on the left, there's a little bump out and a little, yeah, right there, right where the mouse is showing there. That's where the erosion protection will be installed. That was envisioned in the original PAD. That's how the existing site plan and the approved zoning would get built, is with erosion protection, much like this. So we're mimicking that same design. It will be mostly underground, given the shallowness of this wash. So the homes, the street, the improvements will be protected from potential erosion as that wash meanders back and forth over the years. So those are the nuts and bolts of what we're proposing. And as I said, I'm happy to answer questions and continue this discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Olin. Now we've reached the most important part of the meeting, where we hear from you. Before we get started with your questions, I'd like to explain how you can all participate during this meeting. During the question and comment period, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your computer or telephone generated hand. There are 2 ways to do this. For those of you participating via phone, press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand. For those participating on any platform that uses the Zoom app or Zoom website, find the participants icon as shown on the screen at the top or bottom of your screen depending on your device. Click on Participants, and this will open a dialog box where you will see an option to raise your hand as shown on the right-hand side of this slide. Alternatively, if you are using an iPad or tablet, you may need to click the three dots that say More as shown on the screen in order to get the option to raise your hand. Raised hands will be moved to the top of the list in the order in which they are raised. I will then announce your name and turn your mute off so you can speak, and also turn on your video if you'd like. Please make sure you are not also muted on your personal device and that your video is not turned off if you'd like that on, by using the microphone and video icons shown on the screen. When I announce who is up to speak, I will also announce the next person whose turn it will be to speak, so that person will be prepared. Once you have asked your question or made a comment, I will remute you to allow the speaker to provide an answer. If you are having any technical issues with Zoom or have further questions about my Zoom participation instructions, again, our Constituent Services Coordinator, Jessica Hind, is at the ready to help. You can call Jessica anytime during the meeting at 229-4711 to request further assistance. We're going to do our best to get through as many questions and comments as possible. It looks like we have a number of participants tonight, and again, we'll do our best to get to each of you. Please keep your comments or questions to no longer than 3 minutes out of fairness to all participants who wish to be heard. I will respectfully remind folks of this guideline as needed. My aim is to keep things moving along in a fair and efficient manner. Again, the goal of this meeting is to have a productive conversation about the project and provide constructive feedback and questions. Please keep that in mind as we move through the meeting tonight. With that, we'll go ahead and start. Looks like I have a number of hands up. Please bear with me as it may take a moment to unmute folks and move between our speakers. It looks like our first speaker is Sprint iPad. If that's your Zoom name, you're up. And then we have Sue Steinman on deck. And I do apologize in advance if I butcher anybody's last name. So Sprint iPad, you are unmuted. Would you like your video on? Hello, would you like your video on?
No, that's okay.
Okay, please go ahead with your question.
I have a question regarding the constant discussion of this project being approved in 1986. Environments change, worlds change, water supplies change. So there doesn't seem to be any factor at all for speaking of environmental changes, only that it's entitled. Has there ever been, or is there any possibility of looking into the fact that our watershed here and our environment and everything that's going on could preclude the possibility of this?
Thank you for your question. So I will take a part of that. So as I said in my presentation, once your property is entitled, the town does not have the legal right to take that entitlement away. What does change over time in response to a lot of those things that you mentioned are some town standards in terms of drainage criteria or water utility criteria, because they will review this as well throughout the process. So those things can change over time, and those are the town requirements I referenced that the development will have to be in conformance with. But once a property is entitled and they have the right to develop, we as a town can't deny that. We would be sued and lose if we did that. So I hope that answers your question. Sue Steinman, you are up, and then Steve Didio. Again, I apologize if I butchered that. So Sue, if you should be unmuted. Would you like your video on?
I'm eating dinner, so.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
You might not want to see that.
It's good.
All right, so I'm a real estate agent and I live in the Highlands, and I have loved Oro Valley giving me information. They've been very good about it. So my question is, from the beginning and later on, the flood zone that Oro Valley has declared for the Highlands has changed. So I want to know, will our flood zones change with this new development? Because, you know, I had clients that bought in one area that wasn't in the flood zone, and now it is in the flood zone. So I'm just trying to understand, Oro Valley has a flood zone and Pima has a flood zone. So how are these two going to interact together?
Okay, yes, thank you for your question. I'm going to give it to Mr. Olin first to address that, and then Mr. Kiesler can chime in if he needs to add anything. So Mr. Olin, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. So the question of Oro Valley flood zones versus FEMA flood zones, this area is not within a FEMA flood zone. From time to time, FEMA updates their maps based on a number of factors, but that may be what happened to your clients. In this case, that wouldn't be applicable just because FEMA, like I said, doesn't have this area mapped as a flood zone. However, Oro Valley also changes their floodplain management rules and ordinances from time to time, and that's what Mr. Spaeth was referring to, and that is despite the fact that the zoning entitlement is in place, the towns, as their flood management rules change, those continue to apply regardless of zoning. So I think maybe that's the nuance there between those two.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. I think that answers the question. Let's see, Stephen Didio is up next, and then Bill Horan is on deck. So, Mr. Didio, you should be unmuted. Would you like your video turned on, sir? And also make sure you're not muted on your personal device. There you go. Would you like your video on?
Sure, except that I'm not Steve Didio.
Oh, okay. Well, then we'll skip it. Go for it.
I think in Zoom I show up as Steve Didio. I'm Ruth Thompson.
Oh, weird. It showed up as Steve Didio.
It does because yeah, I know. My computer thinks
that's okay.
It's because of our HOA, and I use his name for that.
Sounds good. If you've got a question, please go right ahead.
Yeah, so it was just stated that you are not resubmitting for the FEMA submittal. However, last Thursday, the Stormwater Utility Commission says that you are in fact trying to resubmit, and said that they thought that you would have a new favorable result of that. So are you resubmitting or are you not resubmitting? Because I'm just wondering why you were going after, because it seems like a FEMA loan or FEMA grant with taxpayer money is going to benefit a $3.5 or $3.6 billion developer, when really it should be the developer, according to all of the other information that I've seen, should be the one trying to fix the downstream flooding issue.
Okay, Ruth, thank you for the question. I'm going to actually ask Mr. Paul Kiesler, the town engineer, to go ahead and chime in and answer that question, and maybe if he had anything to add for the last one.
Thank you, Mr. Spaeth. So the town's working with the county on this. So we've got several issues here to touch on here. Issue number one is that the FEMA grant money that we were going after had nothing to do with the development that we are dealing with today. That FEMA grant money was purely for helping the Highlands Mobile Home Park. And what that was to contain the 100-year floodplain within the central channel that goes through the mobile home park. Presently today, because of how small that channel is, and it's really not been maintained over the years, the flood zone or the floodway is actually quite broad through the mobile home park. It actually encompasses many, many homes in the 100-year flow. So the purpose of the grant was to create a stilling basin just north of the mobile home park, a berm, the levee system, to redirect the flow into that center channel, and increase the capacity of that center channel so that when it discharges to the south, it's all contained within that channel and it moves the mobile homes out of the floodplain. Now, we were not successful in getting that grant. In concert with that grant, because some of these mitigation measures were actually on the developer's land, the developer was being very gracious by allowing these mitigation measures that they're not required to do. Well, I do need to frame that. They are not required to do this, but they understood the community benefit of this. So they were allowing an easement to be created that had the burn structure and the stilling basin to help, again, benefit the mobile home park. This is not to benefit the development. This is all downstream of what's happening where they're actually building their homes. The next thing is there was a question, the previous question with regard to how come there's so many different floodplains? Well, here's the basic answer. We have recently studied it in depth. It's been studied over the years, but really it's technology changes. So we really have, with our Flow 2D models, it's a computer model of how the water reacts with the land. It is a very accurate model, and it's the latest and greatest. So that's why we have a new model. And there's no difference between what Oro Valley claims as floodplain and what Pima County claims as floodplain, because we work together on this. We are waiting to see what happens with this development before, ultimately we will need to go to FEMA to adjust that floodplain. And if the development, as Mr. Olin was saying earlier, if they were to do any type of additional mitigation measures, that might lessen the floodplain within the mobile home park. So it might take more homes out of it. It won't solve everything, because the majority of that money from the FEMA grant was to improve the channel that runs right down the middle of the mobile home park. But whatever we can do, we'll take to pull people out of the floodplain that are downstream and in the park. So I hope that answers both the constituents' questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kieser. And if you have another question, please feel free to raise your hand back up. That's fine. Bill Horan is up, and then it looks like Holly Griswold is on deck. So, Mr. Horan, you should be unmuted. Make sure you're not muted on your end.
Thank
there you go. Would you like your video turned on?
Whatever. It doesn't matter to me. If you
Okay.
want to turn it on, that's fine, or not, either or.
Either way, go for it.
Can you please provide any and all environmental impact studies that were completed for this proposed project and advise any federal or state permits that were needed to allow it and continue with it? And part two to my question is slightly different. In the studies of the water flow, has anybody realized or considered that the homes on the eastern side of the wash, their backyards drain down the slope into the wash during any type of water event? Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for the question. Mr. Oland.
Thanks, Michael. Sure. So that's a great question. So basically, part of the detailed drainage analysis that Atwell will be preparing as part of this plat and engineering design takes into consideration all existing drainage constraints on the property, what flows are coming onto the property from where and where they're going. That includes not only the flows obviously coming through under the large culvert beneath Naranja, but also the other flows which are less significant but still need to be addressed coming off of both of the hillsides. Obviously the ones on the west side we're not going to have to deal with because they'll flow right into the overall floodplain. But the ones on the east side, just as was envisioned in the old approved zoning plan, there will need to be some small drainage swales behind those homes to collect that runoff coming off of that hillside and direct it around the homes and into the wash, where it will ultimately gather north of the mobile home park in the larger basin that Mr. Kiesler was discussing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rowland. Ms. Rowland, would you mind touching on the environment-related studies that will be done as part of the formal submittal?
Sure. Well, we'll be meeting all of Oro Valley's requirements. The environmentally sensitive lands ordinance, of course, as you mentioned, does not apply because of the existing zoning. However, we have modified the site plan in deference to the mapped critical resource area anyway. In terms of additional studies, we don't have plans to do any. It's not a federal issue. There's no FEMA involvement, so there's no nexus there.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, Holly Griswold is up, and then it looks like we're cycling back to some folks who have already asked a question. So if you want to ask a question and you haven't, now's the time to raise your hand. So Ms. Griswold, you should be unmuted. Yep, would you like your video on?
Okay, sure.
Okay. You'll have to
Hi,
turn
I'm
it on.
Holly.
Go
I have
ahead.
a snowbird. Yeah. I'm Holly. I'm a part-time resident in the Highlands, and I've wandered around in that wash quite a lot, so I'm really familiar with the topography. So my questions kind of mirror those of Ruth and Susan, and thank you for your answers and clarifying that so far. But the floodplain maps have changed to be much larger and impact the Highlands a lot more along the entire northern line. And I know there's a berm back there already and a containment area behind the L-shaped berm, and that's done a nice job. But if they're building more houses with more impermeable surfaces like roofs and driveways and a road, then it just seems like it's just going to get worse, because natural gravelly, the alluvial till that is all of that area, all of Oro Valley, can absorb a lot of rainwater. And when you put houses and asphalt on it and roofs, it's not going to absorb that rainwater. So it's going to put even more water into that wash instead of absorbing it into the ground. So I just have some real concerns about that. I think that in order to be fair as a city and a county, you've got to handle the flood descriptions consistently when you're dealing with existing homeowners like in the Highlands and developers who want to develop new property for their own profit. You've got to be consistent across both those populations. And right now it's not consistent. So maybe you can do something to bring those two flood issues, because I know that people in the Highlands, if they want to sell a home, they can't get insurance for a loan because most of the properties are in a floodplain. So it's a big issue for folks in the Highlands. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Olin, would you like to address the increase in pervious surfaces and how that impacts drainage?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Spade. So the drainage study that I mentioned a few minutes ago that Atwell will be performing as part of the detailed engineering design, that will have to demonstrate, it'll have to quantify how much water is currently leaving the site, where it's leaving the site, how quickly it's leaving the site, and then the design that they'll be preparing will have to demonstrate that we are not going to be increasing the flows in quantity, in velocity, and we're not also going to be changing the location where those flows exit the site. So that said, their design will demonstrate that. And as we mentioned before with Mr. Kiesler's comments, we will be working with the town to try to find ways where our design can be adjusted here and there to actually provide additional benefit downstream above and beyond what we would have to do anyway by town code. That said, the question of balance in terms of benefit and cost, in this case, Meritage Homes will be building the subdivision. They'll be bearing the cost of these drainage improvements. Whereas I think if the town is successful getting the grant money, that will have a huge benefit to the mobile home park, but it won't have an associated cost to those residents. So I think the balance is struck, and certainly the burden in terms of cost, public-private, is on the developer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. out of fairness to folks who have not had the opportunity to ask a question, we're going to jump to those folks first, and then we will circle back to folks who have already asked a question. So I believe the next person on the list who has not asked a question is Stephen Didio, and then Dora's iPad is on deck. So Stephen, you should be unmuted, and would you like your video on?
Well, actually, you're back to me. I'm Ruth.
Oh.
You want to go to Steve Didio rather
Okay,
than Stephen Didio.
thank you for being honest. I appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, Steve Didio, I guessed incorrectly. You should be unmuted.
Yeah,
Would you like your
don't need
video
to-
on?
No, that's okay. Just audio is fine. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. One of the depictions in the video and that you showed earlier also in this presentation discussed the homes being built to be 30 to 40 feet below existing homes on each side of the wash. What I'm interested in knowing is how many feet of fill do you estimate will be required to raise the homes to make them safe around a potential flood area, and how that will impact the overall height of the homes in that 30 to 40 foot calculation that you've made?
Okay, Steve, thank you for the question. Mr. Olin.
Mr. Spaeth, I'd like to defer that question to Dennis Roberts at Atwell. He's more familiar with the characteristics of the floodplain.
Okay, Mr. Roberts, you are unmuted. Please go ahead. Would you like your video on, Mr. Roberts? Mr. Roberts, can you hear us? Oh, there he is. Can you hear us okay, Mr. Roberts?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, we can hear you now. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, the site is being elevated where there is floodplain abutting the project. Majority of the site is not required to fill to meet the requirements of the floodplain because it's already elevated to a point where there's no floodplain impacting the site. The only reason we would need fill is to be able to get the road into the project. There's about 3 lots on the end of the subdivision of the cul-de-sac, and 3 lots within the bigger homes or bigger lot subdivision that will have to be elevated. There's roughly about 8 feet of fill above the existing conditions at that point. But those homes are sitting at about 25 feet lower than the highest peak adjacent in the subdivision to the east. So the home will be at least 10 feet below your eye level as you walk out the backyard. That's your worst case scenario.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Roberts. Up next, we have Dora's iPad, and then on deck is Pam Donnelly. So Dora should be unmute if you're not muted on your end. Thank
Okay.
you. Would you like your video on?
No, that's fine. It'll just be an audio only.
And can you tell us your name, Dora? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this is John Bost. Dora's sitting
okay.
next to me. We're using her iPad.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, I've got another flooding related question, and it has to do with any retention pond or basin that might be built to control flooding. The question is, who would own, operate, and maintain or manage that pond? Our neighborhood concern is mosquitoes in stagnant water, and also a question about security, ensuring no animals or children would have access to any standing water that would be in that pond.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, sir, for the question. Mr. Olin?
Sure. So the question of ownership, maintenance, and security of the large basin at the south end. Typically, it would be an HOA maintained and owned element, as it's in common area. However, given that this basin is of regional drainage importance, having some benefits to the downstream, it's, as Mr. Kiesler mentioned, it's something that the town was planning to do, hoping to do with that grant money anyway. We are looking to have the town perhaps, hopefully, take over maintenance responsibility of that, and that way, that should provide a greater level of assurance to surrounding residents that it is maintained.
Okay, thank you. Pam Donnelly is up, and then on deck is -5417. So Miss Donnelly should be unmuted. Would you like your video on?
Sure.
Okay. Should be allowed to do that now. So please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah, this is actually Jim Donnelly. Pam Donnelly is next to
You
me.
get both of us.
Okay.
About a 2 or 3 part question about entryway onto Naranja. One, the first part of it is we've looked at that map and we can't exactly tell where the entryway onto Naranja is planned. Is it right at what everybody's called the pedestrian bridge? Is it east of the pedestrian bridge? And if it's on the pedestrian bridge, and I know extra lanes, at least a left-hand turn is contemplated, then will that bridge have to be rebuilt? If it's not on the pedestrian bridge, it appears to me that the traffic or the exit onto Naranja is lower than Naranja is. There's 2 houses right at the entryway, and people will be coming onto Naranja totally blind. Could you explain that to me?
Okay. Yes, thank you very much for the question. Mr. Olin?
Sure. So the town has roadway design standards that basically direct how streets need to be built. And one of those standards has to do with vertical geometry, maximum slopes, and this gate is no different. What we'll need to do is ensure Atwell will design a gated entry that will ensure that people coming off of Naranja into the gate and also out of the gate onto Naranja have an adequate and safe place to enter and exit. On the exit side, there's a requirement for a certain amount of relatively flat area before it starts sloping down. And so that we'll have to meet all of those requirements just like every other subdivision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. Up next is -5417, and then on deck is Cynthia Sawchuk Hall. So Dash, you should be unmuted. Would you like your video on?
Oh, sure.
Okay, and would you mind stating your name for us, please?
Sure. Shirley McGregor is my name.
Okay.
And I actually have 2 questions. And the first one has to do with, I know you've covered extensively the initial zoning from Pima County that it goes back to CR2. I looked at Pima County CR2 zoning, and minimum lot size was 16,000 square feet. And then it became River's Edge PAD when it's Oro Valley, and all of a sudden there's 7,000 square foot lots. And I really have a problem with the density and the changing in that. I don't understand how something from in the 1980s can be so applicable to today and that can be allowed. But you've covered that a number of times. I just want on record that I do object to the density and the lot size that is proposed for the number of homes down there. With that said, I do have a question about the other kind of water, Oro Valley water. You're putting that kind of density in a space that confined. Is that going to affect any of our water pressure? Will we lose water pressure in the peak times in the morning and then the peak times in the evening?
Okay, thank you. Good question. Mr. Olin?
Well, I think that's actually a better question for Oro Valley Water. But they, as part of the engineering design, Atwell will also be preparing a water improvement plan that includes not just design for the pipes, but also pressure modeling to ensure that the way it's connecting up with the overall system won't have any negative impacts on the pressures that the system needs to maintain.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rowland. Up next is Cynthia Sawchuk Hall. And it looks like the next person who has not asked a question is Gary Riordan. Sorry if I butchered that. So Cynthia, please go ahead. You should be unmuted. And would you like your video turned on?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. You should be able to do that now, and please go right ahead.
Hi everyone. Thanks for showing up tonight. Really appreciate it. I have a couple of questions going on, so please be patient with me. I may not have them in the correct order, but I'm kind of curious. You stated the square footage of the homes, and you are allowed to build. We're all aware of that, and you also 2-story homes are allowed. But what's the percentage of the 2-story homes that you plan on building?
Sure. The Oro Valley has rules about the maximum number of 2 stories that can be built anywhere. In addition, they have rules about where 2 stories can be built. For example, you can't have 2 stories on the end of rows. So when you apply those rules, you typically don't end up with more than about half on a site like this that is not obviously just a really tight grid. It may be a little less than that, but it typically ends up at half or less.
So 23 homes are projected to be 2-story.
As many homes as would be allowed to, but keep in mind also that there's a strong market preference among buyers for single story. And so if people can get the square footage that they want on a single story, that's the direction that they will go. So we'll be following Oro Valley's guidelines in terms of the maximum number and placement of those 2-story homes.
But it could be up to 50% of 23 homes being 2 stories.
50%, what I'm saying with 50% is that typically that's where those Oro Valley guidelines end up pushing the percentages. I'm not committing to 50%. I'm just saying, you asked approximately how many. I'm saying
Right.
That's typically where it ends up given the rules we have to deal with.
Maximum being that. That's what you stated, maximum being 50% of the homes, so 26
No.
homes.
That's not what I said.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I guess I heard you incorrectly. Well, let me just ask another question. Is it possible, because I'm on lot 10 here, obviously facing the west, for us to have some story polling going on so we can get a visual idea of what the actual impact will be for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to take that back to Meritage and discuss that with them.
I think that would make all of us here on this side of the ridge a lot more comfortable, because you're stating the homes will be 20 to 30 feet below our sight line, but then the other gentleman stated there may be some fill, there may not be any needed fill, but in order for us, regardless of the flooding issues, we don't have push ridge views this side, we rely on our sunset views, and I think it would just really make us all feel a lot more comfortable if we would actually see a story polling that we will not be seeing rooftops, especially if we would have a maximum of whatever the amount is for 2 stories. Okay, so another question I have basically about the proposed development is, do you have a timeline proposed from start to finish?
So that's a 2-part question. In terms of our design process, we're at the very beginning, as Mr. Spaeth indicated. Typically, that takes 6 to 10 months, just depending on how the reviews go and things like that. And then in terms of construction, I'm actually not sure about that. I can find out and be ready at our next meeting with a estimated construction time frame.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, next up, for someone who has not asked a question, it looks like Gary Riordan, and then Steven's iPad is on deck. So Gary, you should be unmute. Please go ahead and just for simplicity's sake, if you folks have more than one question, that's perfectly fine. If you would just go ahead and ask all your questions at once, and then we will answer those as they come in. So can you, Gary,
Hi.
would you like your video on?
No, it's okay. I have a very quick question. I thank you so much for the clarity from all sides that have talked about the proposed building of houses. My home is one of the custom homes that's adjacent on the western side of the property, or the wash. And you've talked a lot about the it'll be above the proposed properties. You've talked about the drainage going down to the mobile homes down there, but you haven't talked very much about my home in particular, which is on a hillside that could potentially be compromised by the changes in what you're proposing. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I don't know if you've gone far enough in your planning on that, but I'd like to understand better about how that could affect the custom homes that are on the west side of the property. And I understand, and frankly, I don't disagree with anything that's been said here. I just want to make sure that my property is being protected properly.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rowland.
Yes, sir. So no, that's a great question. As part of, I sound like a broken record, I know, but as part of the drainage analysis that we'll be preparing as part of the detailed engineering, which we expect to submit very shortly. It's not done yet, but part of that is going to be the town will check to make sure that nothing that's being proposed is going to force excessive flows or velocities into areas that aren't experiencing those. Erosive hillside against your house, for example, I know that the town would be looking to make sure that none of the improvements that are proposed, like I said, would be forcing water over there that would have a likelihood of doing the sort of erosive damage that you're talking about.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Rowland. Up next is Stephen's iPad, and then on deck we have Mikhail, I believe is how you pronounce that, and then we'll circle back to folks who have asked a question already. So Stephen's iPad, please, you should be unmuted. Would you like your video on? Stephen's iPad, can you hear us? Would you like your video on? We can't hear you. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe there's a microphone issue on your end. I'll try and circle back to you in just a second, but if we aren't able to get to your question, please do ensure that you forward that question to ask@oralvalleyaz.gov so that we can hear it and get you an answer. Up next is Mikhail, and then we have Stacy Andrus. So Mikhail should be unmuted. Would you like your video on?
Yes, please.
Okay, and then if you wouldn't mind just stating your full name for us, that would be great.
Okay, first off, my name is Michael Hobbert. It's just
sorry.
So, it's nothing new for me. I have two questions. One is, how many will the homes have garages? And if not, how many are allowed to park in the driveways? If they do have garages, how many can park in the driveway? Because I'm trying to figure out the density of vehicles in the area. The second question I wanted to know about too is if you're a developer, like somebody buys land and the next person improves it part of the way, and then the next person sells it to another developer that actually builds the home, do we have to go through these procedures all over each time somebody sells the property to the next buyer?
Okay, thank you for the question. Mr. Rowland, if you would like to address that.
You just muted me.
You're good.
All right. So I can answer the question about garages. Typically, these homes have 2 or 3 car garages. It'll be at least 2. And then the driveways are designed to hold at least 2 vehicles That's 2 + 2 is the standard, but as I said, number of the models offer a 3-car, a third option. So as far as the process goes, the process that we're going through right now is driven by a development request, not by a change of ownership. So the reason we're here tonight is because Meritage is proposing to build this subdivision. And if this process goes forward and everything's approved, and Meritage will build the streets and the homes. But I guess in the hypothetical that you offered, maybe one home builder comes in, builds the roads, builds some of the houses, and then another home builder for some reason gets involved and builds some of the houses. That's highly unlikely, but that would not trigger the need to go back through this because what they would collectively be building is already what's approved. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Owen. Up next, we've got Stacy Andrus. Apologize if I messed that up. You are the last person with a first-time question, so you should be unmuted, and then Sprint iPad will be up again. So, Stacy, would you like your video turned on?
Oh, God, no, please. No, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, let me see. Thank you again for the opportunity for this meeting. I appreciate it. I'm sure everybody else does too. My questions are I have a few, so I'll try to make it one big question. Predominantly regarding the hillsides, obviously on the east side. First question is, there's, judging by the topography, it's showing what we have existing. And my question is, first, are we going to be looking at a whole bunch of riprap along the side there? Is part of the question. The other is the little hill that is existent, which looks like it would be, I can't read the lot, but it's your first lot on the east side of the new proposed subdivision. Is that hill going to still be there, or is that going to be removed? And I guess really what I'm looking for is an actual distance from the hillside to the backyards or whatever yards of the east side of the proposed subdivision. And the last part of the same question, because the erosion factor is something that deeply concerns many of us, and how it impacts further down for wildlife as well as the plant life. What can we anticipate with the desert flora that is already in existence? Are we going to see the developer yanking out the trees and everything, and that just going into a chipper? And how far up? Because I understand where my property line ends and where theirs begins. I just want to know what I'm not going to see.
Okay. Yes, thank you for the question. Mr. Oland?
Sure. Okay, so the question about the distance from the proposed homes to the hillsides, it's hard to tell from the two graphics that are on the screen, but one thing that we've done that we think is a big improvement is actually pulled the homes away from the hillsides more so than what they were shown or are shown in the existing approved plan. So for example, if you look at the plan on the left, coming off of Naranja, and then there's that sort of an island in the middle of the road there. Thank you. And if you look at the lots that are to the east of that, they push way up onto that hill. They look to me like they're 20 feet or so from the back of those homes. But you compare that area to what we've proposed, we've pulled the entire bank of homes much further down, so that the hillside disturbance will be much less. That said, there are a few pockets, especially towards kind of in the middle to the south, where there are little knobs and things that stick out a little more than in smoother hillside, if you will, that predominates the northern portion, where we will be cutting into that a little bit, but again, much less than before. That little knob up by the gate, we will be trimming the lower tip of that for that lot. However, most of it will remain. Question also about trees and things like that. So obviously the area that's dark green on here, which the town has identified as a more sensitive environmental area, the critical resource area, we've adjusted the plan out of that versus the plan on the left that, as I mentioned before, just runs right over that. So more trees will be preserved than under the existing plan with our new plan. And of course, we'll be following the town's native plant preservation ordinance in terms of salvaging healthy specimens, mitigating where necessary. So we'll be following all those rules.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. Would you mind addressing what your plan for treatment of the disturbed hillsides is? I think she had a question about whether it was going to be riprap or...
Sure. Yeah, sorry about that. So in general, we like to avoid riprap where we can because it requires more maintenance and it costs more to build. So it's used sparingly where necessary to keep a steeper slope from eroding, or also where there's more velocity in terms of stormwater flow. So there'll probably be spots of riprap along the back of those homes, but they will be downslope from the homes up on the eastern bank. So I think visibility will be pretty minimal.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. Looks like we have a first-time questioner with the label PLB. You are up, and then Sprint iPad is on deck. So PLB, you should be unmuted. Would you like your video on?
No video, please.
Okay, and would you mind just stating your full name for us?
Sure, Peter Brandt. And I'll ask a couple questions at once. They're kind of related. First, we've talked about the 1986 Pima County PAD plan, which basically degraded CR2 to R17. First part of the question is, can Oro Valley provide a map of the city of Oro Valley showing all degraded CR2 or above zoning that was degraded to R17 cluster projects? The second part of that is, can we see a map as well of all development, housing development now or planned that would be in a basin adjacent to a wash with equivalent flows to the one we have here?
Thank you for the question, sir. So certainly if you wanted to put in for a public records request, we could try and track down some of that. I know for the first part of your question, this, as I said during my presentation, is a very unique situation. It's the only planned area development that I know of that was translated with the Pima County development standards. Usually when you annex into a town, you translate those to town zoning. And so because of what was approved prior to annexation, this particular PAD was approved with those Pima County standards, which included what you call the down zoning, if you will, in terms of lot size. So that was all done as part of the Pima County Board of Supervisors. So that's a unique situation for the town. We do have other examples in town of areas that have entitlements that were previously approved, and the town has to legally approve those if they meet code requirements. So we can certainly look into that request if you'd like to reach out to us at ask@oralvalleyaz.gov. Thank you. So up next, we've got Sprint iPad again, and then I think it's Stephen Didio, but I think it's Ruth on the other end. So Sprint iPad, please, you should be unmuted. Please feel free to ask a question. And would you mind stating your name, please?
Sure. I'm Aldi Rosenberg, and
Okay, thank you.
I'm a new resident here, and I really love it. I happen to live in Montera Hills, which is right up the road from this development. So I was wondering, I noticed they stated there's going to be no environmental impact studies. And if that's the case, how do we know that the protected species of plants, flora, and fauna are actually being protected? If there's no environmental impact and no study showing that here we have this and here we have that. So I'm kind of confused on that subject. Also, one other question, which I was just, the gentleman before kind of addressed, but so my understanding is it was 1,600 square feet or 16,000 square feet for lots versus 7,000 square feet. So when they bought this in 1986, the plan was for larger lots. And then somehow Oro Valley changed that to 7,000 square feet lots. I'm confused about that. We're saying we have to stick to 1986,
sure.
but then we're saying we don't have to stick to 1986 when it's not convenient.
Thank you for the question. So I'll ask Mr. Olin to answer the first one in just a second. So apologies if I wasn't clear. No, what I actually was saying was that the zoning for CR2, the previous speaker is correct, typically is for a 16,000 square foot minimum lot size. Prior to annexation, the county, the Pima County Board of Supervisors, approved a cluster design which for this property allowed minimum lot sizes of 7,000 square feet. So the town had no role whatsoever in approving the lot size reduction. That was already approved before the property was annexed into the town. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And Mr. Olin, if you wouldn't mind touching on the requirements for endangered species and flora and fauna, that would be great.
Sure, sure. So there are none. Oro Valley has their native plant preservation ordinance, which does list some regulated species of plants, which will certainly be inventorying in the areas that are proposed for disturbance and mitigating or relocating those as needed per that ordinance. There's no requirement for a study for animals though.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. And I will just clarify a little bit. So our native plant requirements for the town do have restrictions on impacts on endangered species plants. But Mr. Olin is right. At this point in the process, we do not have a endangered species requirement for animals, but we do work with the Arizona Game and Fish as well. So with that said, looks like Stephen Didio is up next, and then Bill Horan. So if that's Ruth on the other end, please go ahead, and if you wouldn't mind stating your full name, that would be helpful.
Ruth Thompson.
Thompson. Okay,
I have a question because you've shown the sketch of the houses down in the wash, but you don't have any dimensions on it. So what are the dimensions of the houses that you're showing on that drawing? What is the dimension of the east hillside that you're showing? And if there's fill, specifically, where is this fill potentially going to be? Because from what I understand, you can build houses, 28 feet is the standard, but you can supposedly go to 34 feet. Then you're talking about 8 feet of fill, and you're saying it's going to be 25 feet below. Can you provide us with dimensions on that drawing so that we can actually see that you are stating something accurate?
Okay, thank you for the question. Mr. Olin?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So our Atwell is working on the grading plan right now. And what we can commit to is once that's finalized, we can provide a map that very clearly shows all of those offsets and fill areas and depths and things like that. That's a design that's underway, but will be submitted very shortly, and we'll be happy to provide that as soon as it's done.
Thank you, Mr. Olin. It does look like we have a first-time questioner, so we're going to jump to them. Jamie Dundon. Hopefully I got that right. Apologies in advance. You're up. And then Bill Horan, you are on deck. So Jamie, please, you should be unmuted. Would you like your video turned on?
No, it's all right.
Okay, please go ahead.
So Maybe I missed it earlier, but there was a previous like water study done when Davis first bought the lots. Was that ever given out to anyone, or is it? Can we see that, or can we get a hold of that? Because I had the understanding that it had failed quite badly, the testing boxes that they had put down into the wash.
Thank you for your question. Mr. Olin, would you like to expound upon the drainage study efforts that you and your team have put together?
Sure. I'm not aware of the previous study. I don't know what it showed or who did it. But I can tell you that this current effort, which Atwell is leading on the engineering side, will have to meet all of the town's requirements in terms of drainage design, mapping, and analysis. So again, not sure what happened in the past, but this current one will need to demonstrate full compliance.
Okay, thank you. So Bill Horan, you're up, and then Stephen's iPad is on deck. So Bill, please feel free to go ahead. Should be unmuted.
Thank you for acknowledging me again. Quickly, it was touched on. My concern is the eastern hillside. On one of the slides, there was a horizontal image where it looked like a small retaining wall on the east side behind a home, and it looked like there was nothing being, the hillside was not being built into. My concern is if you're allowed to go 20 or 25% into the hillside and the bulldozer comes in and just digs that out, what's the potential for the whole hillside to collapse and the properties up on top to just wind up at the bottom? It's a little extreme, but you know, just for making the point. So yes, that's the picture where it says hillside to be preserved, and then you see the little vertical line behind the home. Is that a wall or something? No, down to your left. Down to your left. Yeah, that one. Is that a wall? Is that as far as they're going to go, or are they actually going to dig into the hillside? And again, my concern is collapse because it's clay, sand, and it's not like it's concrete, and you know we don't want our backyards down the bottom of the wash. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rowland.
Sure. So that little line there is just meant to represent graphically a rear yard wall for that home there. If you can go back to the last slide though, that shows the site plan. Not that one. Yeah. So as I mentioned, one thing we've done is pulled the rear edge of these lots down that hillside much more compared to what's the existing plan. So in some areas, maybe you can see just north of that little bulb that's in the middle of the road, you can see where the green lightens out behind those lots. I don't know if Mr. Spade, you could put your mouse up to the north. You see the bulb in the middle? Yeah, exactly. So that little bit of lighter green means that the topographic contours are a little bit further apart in that area, which indicates that it's less steep. So in some areas, I'll have the lots further down. In other areas, like just south of there, where you can see the topo contours there touching the backs of the lots. In those areas, we will be cutting into the bottom of the hillside a little bit, not drastically, but because we have enough room to accommodate the homes that we want to without doing that. And so that how that hillside ends up looking will also affect the future residents here. Meritage does not want a big ugly riprap wall behind those residents either. That would certainly affect their sales and values. But where we do need to cut into the lower portions of those hillsides, they'll certainly need to be stabilized according to town rules. And again, that'll be part of Atwell's overall engineering design.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. Up next is Stephen's iPad, and then Pam Donnelly is on deck. So Stephen's iPad, you should be unmuted if you'd like to go ahead. Stephen's iPad, can you hear you? Still having microphone troubles, I guess, huh? Apologize for that there. if you, like I said earlier, please feel free to email your questions or comments to ask@oralvalleyaz.gov, as unfortunately we're having some troubles hearing you tonight. So Pam Donnelly, you're up, and then Steve Didio. Pam, you should be unmuted. Would you like
you
your
hear
video
us?
on? We can,
Sure.
yes. Would you?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure. Yeah,
please go ahead.
Okay, we'll just go ahead. There's several mention of a new drainage study, and I believe it was promised to be produced before this meeting. Has the study been complete? It's been promised in a couple of different answers. Is there only one detailed drainage study? And if there is it complete? And if it is complete, can it be posted along with everything else that's posted on the website where we're all getting the information?
Okay, thank you for the question. Mr. Olin, can you give us a status update on what has been produced to this point?
Sure. So the initial drainage study that was mentioned was basically an analysis of existing conditions. That is what I'm sorry, I don't remember, Mr. Spaeth, if you or Mr. Kiesler mentioned it earlier in the meeting, but that was prepared by Atwell and reviewed and conditionally approved by the town, just as sort of a baseline, because the town, as was mentioned before, wanted to get a better handle on what the drainage condition was pre-development before getting into these discussions here that we're in tonight, and certainly before a formal and more detailed submittal comes in. That said, Atwell is almost done preparing the detailed drainage study that includes the entire post-developed condition, the proposed condition. That'll be submitted along with the rest of the plans here within the next week or so.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Olin. And if you would like to submit a public records request, you can certainly have access to that drainage concept when it is available to us. So I would like to just point out that it is about 3 minutes to 7:30. I still have a number of hands up in the air, so if it's okay with everybody, we'll keep pressing on until 8 o'clock or until we're completed with questions. So with that said, Steve Didio, if you would like, you should be unmuted, and we have Dora's iPad again. So it's on deck. So Steve Didio, please go ahead.
Thank you. Earlier was mentioned in the meeting that the minimum square foot of the homes being anticipated is 2,342 square feet, and the minimum lot size is 7,000 square feet. So I was looking at the drawing, and the lots appear to be all of a similar size in the upper portion of the construction area. My question for you is it even possible to build a 2,342 square foot, one-story house on a 7,000 square foot lot? Because we were told earlier that half of the homes would be, approximately half would be two-story, half would be one-story. The smallest being 2,342. I assume that applies to the one-stories. Seems to me like that it might not be mathematically possible. And I would also like to know what the anticipated price ranges of the homes from the developer will be.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Mr. Olin?
Sure. The home sizes that I stated earlier absolutely will fit. Mathematically, it works. In terms of the pricing, we're not allowed to quote that. There's real estate rules in play, but the anticipated starting price is in the 400s.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. It does look like we actually have two new first-time questioners, so we'll jump to them. So Eddie Leba is up, and then Scott and Christina Randolph will be on deck. So Eddie, you should be unmuted on your end. Or you're unmuted rather. There you go. Would you like your video turned on?
No, thank you.
Okay.
This is Paula Tomasini. I'm here with Eddie Leba. We're in Lot 9 on the East Ridge. I might have missed this, but what are the home prices? What are the ranges of the home prices for these homes? And secondly, is in the proposed plan, it didn't appear that there was a designated like common area, like a park or a playground. Is that part of the plan as well?
Okay. Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Olin.
Sure. Starting price for the homes, again, we're not allowed to get too specific with it, and it's still in the works, but the starting price will be in the 400s, and there's not a recreation area proposed.
Okay. Up next, we have Scott and Christina Randolph, and then we'll have Dora's iPad on deck. So Scott and Christina, you should be able to unmute. Would you like your video turned on?
No, that's okay. Thank you. And
Okay,
this is,
please go ahead.
yeah, our question is, are we going to be able to see a draft of the CC&Rs for this development for what the homeowners will receive?
Thank you for your question. Mr. Olin?
Sure. They're under development right now, but they are required to be submitted with the final plat, and so they'll certainly be done by that time, which should be maybe halfway through the process that we're talking about going through here. So within the next 4 to 6 months, I would think that document is ready.
And of course, once those are submitted to the town, if you wanted to submit a public records request, they're certainly available for review. So Dora's iPad is up, and then we have PLB on deck. So Dora's iPad, I know you're not Dora, but please go ahead.
Yeah, this is John Bost again. Yeah, I'll ask a combined question, fairly simple ones. Will the community be gated? That's question one.
Okay.
Do you anticipate in the design of the houses of any rooftop decks on top of the houses? What about street lighting? Will the streets be lit? There'll be undoubtedly landscape lighting, but street lighting, is that part of the plan? And will there be any restriction on the number of any outdoor animals per household? Will that be part of the CC&Rs?
Okay. Thank you for your questions. Mr. Olin.
It will be gated. Yep, and if you look on the site plan there at the northern end, there's a place where the road sort of bulbs out there, and that is, yeah, exactly, right up there. That's where the entry gate's proposed. The larger lots on the south will be off an extension of Shorecliff Drive, so those will not be behind a gate, but all of the Meritage homes on the north side will be behind a gate. No rooftop decks, and of course, in terms of street lighting, it needs to be safe, but we have to comply with dark sky ordinances and animals. I don't believe there would be a specific restriction on the number of animals, but I will certainly ask Meritage and have a very specific answer next time we meet.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. PLB is up, and then Cynthia Sawchuk Hall is on deck. So PLB, you should be unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. We've talked a lot about zoning, flood, that sort of thing. I want to ask a question about access into the community. Naranja on the land bridge is restricted by the guardrails. There has not been an intersection built or reconstructed on Naranja from First to La Canada in the last 30 years that has not included a turn lane. So let's assume you have a turn lane on the land bridge. based on city requirements for the width of a road with a lane, now we are jeopardizing pedestrian and bicycle walks. So here's my question. Lambert has turn lanes to Lambert Lane. Lambert Lane has a turn lane and in one direction and could easily have another turn lane in the other direction onto North Shore Cliff. So rather than be a question on regulations, this one is on passing the smell test. Why in the world are we not talking about accessing the entire community off of Lambert? And I will cover in a separate request to the city 3 pages of questions dealing specifically with the problems of Naranja.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Olin?
Sure. Well, the access that we're proposing is in line with the existing approved plan. Of course, if there's a requirement for a turn lane on Naranja, that will be fleshed out in the traffic report that's currently being prepared and which will also be submitted with the detailed engineering plans that Atwell's working on. But in terms of Naranja versus Lambert, I don't know that there was a ton of thought put into that because Naranja is a significantly better window. Coming off of Lambert, you have to drive through another subdivision to get to the site. So the visibility is very low, and you'd also be impacting those homes down there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. Cynthia Sawchuk Hall is up, and then Michael is on deck. So Cynthia, please go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. I just have a kind of a quick comment on the discussion about the turn lane. In 1986, when that plan was approved, I just want to remind everyone, Naranja was a dirt road. There wasn't even a road at that point in time. The paved portion came in when Terry Hills was being built. So access in and out of that subdivision, I don't even think was something that people were even literally thinking about. So just, I want the town to be putting some thought into that. We've had a lot of construction since the paved road came into effect, which is going to mean a lot more traffic. And now we have a park that we're drawing traffic into. So not having a turn lane just doesn't make any sense. And I love the idea of it coming through the south side. To me, that makes perfect sense. Whoever thought of that, brilliant, by the way. Okay, so that's my comment on that. Now I just have another question. So please forgive me on this ignorance because I can't remember the term. But when you dig into a hillside, I know there's a set amount of percentage that you can dig into a hillside right now. Is that correct for Oro Valley? To disturb it?
Yes.
And can you tell me,
there are restrictions on how much you can disturb, yes.
can you tell me what that is?
Sure. So the code requires that you can't dig in and cut is what it's called, or remove dirt over 6 feet. Or you can go up to 8 feet with what's called terracing, where you kind of step down the slope with landscaping or things of that nature that can help kind of minimize any view impacts.
Is the developer asking for a variance on that at this time?
Mr. Olin?
We're not, but as Mr. Spaeth indicated before, part of the unique zoning that this property has is that when it was zoned and annexed and when the zoning was translated into Oro Valley, that translation carried with it the Pima County hillside development regulations. So
which
that's
was
actually what we're, sorry.
Which was how much? If Oro Valley 6 to 8, what was Pima County at that time?
You know, I'd have to look back at that and get back to you on that.
Okay, I think it's 7 feet.
I think it's more than 6 to 8. I think it's less restrictive than Oro Valley's, but I will look into that.
Okay, so will you be asking for a variance?
We're not asking for any
If
variances.
it's outside of the Oro Valley codes, you will not be.
We are going to abide by the zoning that's in place, which carries the Pima County regulations with it.
But you're not sure.
We're not aiming to meet Oro Valley's regulations on that matter.
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that, please?
The applicable grading regulations to this property are Pima County's, not Oro Valley's. So those are the requirements that we're meeting.
Okay, even though you're building in Oro Valley, your neighbors are Oro Valley, you're not going to apply the Oro Valley rules.
That's the way the zoning is.
So if I can chime in here. So just to clarify, so the neighbors to the east were part of the same zoning that this property is as well, and they're subject to the exact same standard. So the town engineer and engineers have told me that there actually is not a cut and fill limitation in Pima County standards, but they do require benching, which is essentially like terracing, to minimize the visibility of any impacts to hillsides. So that's the standard that their development will be held to. Okay, let's see. Michael is up next, and then Stephen Didio. Michael, you should be unmuted. Please go ahead. Hopefully I got it right this time.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. My question is going back to the proposed plan in 46 that you had up a little while ago. If the economy took another downturn for the worse, like it did in 07, beyond our controls and Meritage's controls, and they're not able to finish building out that area, will Meritage still build homes on there, or do we take, or is there going to be some kind of flooding analysis done? Because with those vacant lots there, now if there happened to be a flood, it seems like it would redirect to a different way, a different direction. And so how would that, does there have to be a study in case something like that cannot be completed right away?
Sure. So thank you for the question, and I can actually answer that question. So the town requires bonds and assurances, which is a financial commitment from the developer based off a percentage of the property development costs that will cover that possible eventuality, just in case something like that happens and Meritage or whoever the home builder isn't able to finish it out. The town has that financial assurance so that we can go back in and stabilize those areas that weren't possibly stabilized prior to them moving on. So yes, the town does have a means of making sure that those things are addressed ahead of time. And that's a requirement. They have to give that to us before they can get any building permits. So we make sure that we have that financial assurance set. So Stephen Didio and then Gary Riordan is on deck. So Stephen, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Ruth again.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi, I did not receive an answer on my question on the last time. On the sketch that shows the houses in the wash, you don't have any dimensions. What are the dimensions of the houses that are shown in that drawing? What is the dimension of the hillside on the east in that drawing? Again, we'd like to have clarification to know what exactly we are going to be seeing, because you've done a drawing that has no dimension, which is, I mean, I spent my life, creating drawings with dimension. So just having a drawing that shows this doesn't tell us the actual truth. We want to know what are the heights of the homes that are shown there so that we can have a better understanding of what you're planning, especially since you're now talking that you can go in and remove cut and fill with no limit on the hillsides, which means that I'm assuming you can also change where the plan is and you can actually approach the hillside more. But first of all, please tell us what the dimensions are that you're showing on that drawing.
Okay, yes, thank you for the question. And Mr. Olin?
Sure. Well, I'm looking at it right here. There's a scale on it. 1 inch equals 200 feet down there at the bottom right-hand corner. So what I can do is I can add dimensions to this drawing. I can do that tomorrow and email it to the town so that there are numbers on here in case you don't have a scale, and that way that can give you some real clear, concise answers to that question. And what I did say last time this question came up was that what we can commit to is as soon as the grading design is done, as soon as Atwell is done there, we will happily supply a map showing all those dimensions you requested, and in addition, cut and fill depths as well. That as soon as that design is done, we will be submitting that, and that will be public record, so everybody will have access to that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rowland. And just as a heads up, we're about 7:45 here, so we're getting close to the end. I'm trying to get in as many questions as we can. It looks like I think Stacy Andress has actually only asked one question, and everybody else has had more than one. So I'm going to ask them to unmute. Please feel free. And then Gary Orden is on deck. So Stacy, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I feel kind of bad, like I jumped in front of Gary. I kind of have a couple questions. The first easy one, I think, is will there be in the CCNRs anything stating, I know this is jumping the gun a lot, but I'm a little bit concerned about solar, rooftop solar, and what we would be looking at on that, and what other things to not be eyesores, I guess, because even though, you know, I understand what you're saying with the line of sight, and, you know, if we don't look down, we won't see rooftops, but what's going to be going on with that? And then I still was a little confused as to, and I know that because it isn't a straight line, that it is a variant question, but regarding the proximity to the hillsides and the eastern side of the proposed subdivision, I was looking for a rough estimate, I guess, on how far from the base of the hillside are these lots. What's distance? Because I just know that it's a sandy loam down there, and I have a little retaining wall sticking out of the end of mine so that it doesn't fall into the wash. And you know, a lot of us are just concerned about the impact. And the other thing that somebody else had brought up, we don't have crystal balls or anything, but you had said 6 to 10 months for just the planning stage. Does that mean in a year that they would be breaking ground and grading, or is there even, I'm sorry, I have technically, I guess, 3 questions. Does that mean in a year's time, we're going to see the equipment coming in and grading it out and putting in the roadways? Do we have a,
okay.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Olin, did you go ahead and answer those? And if you missed any, I'll remind you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Spaeth. In terms of solar, solar is always addressed in the CCNRs. I will follow up with Meritage to see how they're going to address it in this particular subdivision. So I will have to get back to you about that. I don't know the answer tonight. In terms of the eastern hillside, again, what we're proposing is a market improvement over the existing approved plan in terms of hillside disturbance along that edge. We've pulled these lots much further down the hillside. There will be a lot less disturbance than is currently allowed under that existing plan. That said, we will be putting the back of these lots anywhere from basically at the base of the hill to, in some cases, towards the southern end and a little bit at the northern, that we will be cutting into that hillside a little bit. That said, we're not allowed to destabilize the hills. There has to be engineering design. Any kinds of modifications to the existing topography have to be shown to work. The engineering has to support it. And that's one of the things Atwell is doing. We'll also have a geotechnical engineer on board who will analyze the soils out there, hillside soils, down in the lowland soils, to make sure that the engineering solutions for soil stabilization are adequate, and that they are designed appropriately depending on what is being, if it's a riprap slope, or if it's erosion protection on the other side, or if it's a road subgrade, or if it's beneath a home footer. All of those things will be addressed by the engineers and the geotech. It's also worth noting that I think state law does not permit HOAs to prohibit solar. I'm pretty sure that's the case, but again, I will have to put a pin in that one and get back to you specifically about this project and its CCNRs.
And how about when you might be breaking ground?
Yes, I'm sorry. You said you'd prompt me if I missed one. 10 to 12 months.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yep.
So let's see. We have Gary Riordan up, and then Pam Donnelly is on deck. So Gary, please go ahead. Please just make sure you're not muted on your end.
Okay, can you hear me?
There we go. We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so my question is fairly simple. So you are, I presume at some point in the next 12 months, you'll break ground, you're gonna build some houses. It's gonna be smaller than what you proposed before. After the building is complete, assuming that this goes forward, are you allowed to build anything further onto this property or not?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Olin.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Spaeth. What we'll be proposing is that the lot configuration and road configuration follows this design. The engineering will detail that out, and all of the areas outside of improvements will be common area maintained by the HOA, with the exception possibly of the regional basin towards the south end. And if the town is willing and able to take maintenance responsibility of that, which we believe they should, because it actually has a significant benefit to others, more so than this development, then that would be the one exception to that.
Okay.
But the rest of it would be common area. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Good to clarify. Pam Donnelly is up next, and then Bill Horan is on deck. So Pam should be ready to go.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Gary. I'm your next door neighbor. We don't see much of each other. I, like Mr. Riordan, who spoke just a moment ago, am one of the 4 homeowners on the east side. 3 of those homes, Mr. Riordan's, ours, and the one below us, front right along that wash. I was really concerned by something that your engineer, whose name I have temporarily, Dennis Roberts, said, Mr. Oland. Someone asked about bringing in fill and how much fill there would be and what that would do to the heights of the homes. Now, the cross section that we saw from you in the last video and tonight, in the course of tonight, we talked about a 30 to 40 foot, those houses would be 30 to 40 foot lower than the homes in Pushridge Vistas. Tonight, I heard your engineer tell a questioner, at least 10 feet. They'll be at least 10 feet. It concerns me, not so much from myself really, but as the next house that is further south from us sits lower, 10 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, how are we, any of us on either side, supposed to know anything that we can project as far as how tall these houses are going to be when we've heard 40 feet below your line and 10 feet, and I'm not even sure where that, as I recall, when you did before, that cross section is somewhere in the middle, closer to my house.
Sorry, Pam, was there a question in there?
Yeah, the question was, how are we supposed to know how tall these homes are going to be when we've heard 30, 40, and 10 all in the same evening?
Okay, great, thank you. Mr. Oland?
Sure, yeah, so the areas that will receive the kinds of fill that Mr. Roberts was talking about I believe, are the southern lots there, the larger lots there that are much more distant and further from the neighborhood to the east. So the cross-section graphic that we've shown, that is accurate for most of these smaller lots up here, just in terms of a guideline, what the general differences are. And up in those areas, those are the areas that Mr. Roberts indicated we're not going to need to receive much, if any, fill, because those areas are not impacted by the floodplain. It's the areas further south there, primarily where those larger lots are, that are going to need some fill. And down there, again, much more distant from existing homes.
Okay, thank you. So Bill Horan, and then I think next up would be PLB. That'll probably be our last two questions tonight. Again, if you have more, please feel free to send them to ask@oralvalleyaz.gov, and we will try and get you answers as quickly as we can. So Bill, you should be unmuted. Please go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, thanks again. I'm actually sitting here with my brother-in-law. We've kind of been researching this all as a team, and he had a question, so if you don't mind hearing his as well.
Sure, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Patrick Roach. My question has to do with direction of the water in the wash. It appears by the diagrams that we're getting, the water will be funneled above the wash from the width of that entire wash to something maybe 30 feet wide. Is that all going to get done above the wash, above the Naranja, or are we going to redirect the water literally underneath the wash? Does the builder own the land above that? Is that something, is that a concern at this point? What I'm looking at is, where are you going to direct the water to the west side of the wash? Is that going to be done under the bridge, or is that going to be done a little further up north of the bridge? And is that land also need to be purchased?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Olin?
Sure. So the currently stormwater flows down. When it hits Naranja, it's all collected and funneled into those existing culverts underneath Naranja. So at the south side of the Naranja right-of-way, that's where this property starts, and that's where we need to accept the flows coming onto the property. At that point, they come out as the width of the culverts, and from there, there's an expansion factor that has to do with topography and velocity and all that, but it generally comes out kind of as an opposite funnel out the other end of those culverts, and so it comes down and pretty much follows the western property line that you can see on this exhibit here. You see where it says Naranja Drive there. The culverts are right below that word. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mr. Spaeth. And that's roughly where the flows go. So up in that northern portion of the site, excuse me, we're not proposing to constrain it. It sort of flows away from where we're proposing the lots anyway. And then as it curls down in the southern portion of the site, that's where it kind of bends back to the center, and that's where the erosion protection really becomes more important. Although it will be installed wherever the erosion hazard setback comes into play. But in terms of the land north of Naranja, that's not owned, nor does it need to be, because the way the floodplain ordinance reads is we need to accept it how it comes onto the property, which is where it exits via those culverts. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olin. And PLB, you're going to be our last question of the night. You should be unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, just a compliment. You know, I'm a big bike rider. I don't think there's a road in Oro Valley that hasn't been done on my bike. And the amount of thoughtfulness that's gone in over La Cholla, north of Tangerine, in terms of traffic flow, in terms of accessibility and safety of pedestrians and bikes is really impressive, and you can be proud of it. Just, I need a point of clarification. Mr. Olin mentioned, I think 3 times he used the term approved plan. And I'm guessing that what he's referring to is not maybe an approved plan that none of us really are not aware of, but probably the 1986 degradation of CR2 to cluster housing. And I'll just point out that if that is the approved plan that you're referring to, that clearly had the access into the community coming from Lambert Lane. That's my last comment.
So, Minister Spaeth, would you mind putting the comparison slide up? Thank you. So the approved plan that I've referred to several times is the one on the left. That is from the existing zoning. And that does show access coming in from Lambert all the way up to Naranja. So it shows access from both sides.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Olin, and everybody for your questions and comments. I'd like to conclude by reiterating how to make your voice heard over the course of this process. Again, this is just the first step. There will be multiple opportunities to participate throughout the process. A second web-based, fully interactive Zoom meeting will be conducted following formal submittal, but again, a date for that meeting has not yet been determined. We will continue to notify, suppose I should put my slides up. Sorry, folks. We will continue to notify property owners who received a yellow postcard for this meeting and post the property with yellow signs for each of the upcoming events. If you wish to receive a postcard and did not for this video, again, please reach out via ask@oralvalleyaz.gov, provide your name and address, and we will ensure that you are notified next time. I'd like to remind folks that additional information has been posted on ovprojects.com, and it will be continually to be as the town receives a formal application and additional information. Please use this website throughout the process to stay informed. I'd like to reiterate, it is important to hear your comments and questions. Community participation is what makes Oro Valley a special place. Community input has shaped every subdivision plat application in Oro Valley, just as it will in this project. Again, please stay in the know by checking into ovprojects.com and keep an eye out for the second neighborhood meeting notices. Thank you and have a great night.